So let's begin. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming, and welcome to the virtual roundtable. It's the first event of the CMU AI Retail and Service Design Initiative, or CAIRS. We appreciate your time. My name is Paul Pangaro. I'm professor of practice in the Human Computer Interaction Institute, part of the School of Computer Science. And I'm joined by my co-lead, DK Lee, who will be speaking in a couple of minutes. So as the first public event of CAIRS, we should say that we began this initiative thinking about it about a year ago in recognition of the needs of the retail and services industry to adopt new technologies, of course. The challenges, though, that go with that technology, understanding them, evaluating them, ultimately deploying those technologies, is a rich and complicated question, and we want to encompass those as well. So this is not just a technology question, it's also a services and design question, and ultimately an organizational question. And over the time of CAIRS, we want to touch on those topics. Today, however, we're focused on the immediate urgency that we're all familiar with in our lives and in our businesses. And the areas that we would cover might be, for example, today, data analytics, machine learning, forecasting, especially, of course, with AI, omnichannel, operations, customer and employee safety. These are only the beginning of the kinds of topics we want to cover, but these are the ones that we expect to hit on today. Now, of course, the context of CAIRS is CMU. We are an interdisciplinary university, and we're proud of that, and we have a deep history in that. And so we recognize, as I said a minute ago, that it's more than just the technology. It's this broad range of value that we would provide in our points of view in terms of human-computer interaction and design of business processes and structures as well. So it's not just one or the other, it's the multidisciplinary idea there. Now, so co-leads, DK and I, we have expertise, technology, design, business, organizational change, but we're mere stand-ins for the wide and deep expertise of Carnegie Mellon broadly. And we simply represent the power of who will come with us in these conversations. We have a few CMU professors here today, and we have industry leaders that I know you'll enjoy and realize the depth of their understanding. But it's the transdisciplinary conversation we want to have. Now, it's not just a conversation we want to lead to new ideas and then to action. But of course, we need to understand what's possible through the conversations first. Hence, this is the first of our virtual roundtables. So new collaborations from CMU and the industry, building on the history of research and entrepreneurship, and bringing in the conversations with the richness of the industry leaders that we've brought here today and will continue to bring. And we invite you to be part of that, and we'll talk more about that later in the day. So welcome again to the first of the series of virtual roundtables, and I'll hand it off to DK.
Thank you, Paul. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have attendance from all over the world. My name is Dokyun Lee. I go by DK. I'm an assistant professor in the Tepper School of Business, and I co-lead CAIRS with Paul Pangaro, Chris Kissel, and George Daracos. I currently research interpretive ML for business and economics of unstructured data. At CAIRS, we envision flourishing collaboration between the industry and the research community going forward in utilizing AI to solve a variety of retailer-focused problems. And we are here to spark and sustain this initiative. And in due time, we look forward to research collaboration and workshops. For example, we would love to connect industry leaders and researchers to start sponsored research or release company data sets to selected group of researchers. For our first event, as Paul mentioned, we are focusing on discussing pain points created by pandemic for retailers. For industry leaders present here, we expect this roundtable to be 1, a place to share and hear COVID-related problems, 2, hear potential ways others might have solved some issues, and 3, brainstorm to our solutions. For leading researchers present here, they can share their research insights to solve some of the problems, as well as identify new research path to focus on for maximum impact. And we are here joined today by a very diverse set of industry and research panelists, together covering an impressive breadth and depth of expertise in everything related to retail, AI, and service design. So a little bit about the format. The format of today's roundtable is as follows. First, we will have each panelist give a 5-minute overview of their experience, pressing issues, or research-related research related to retailing in the face of COVID-19. We will then open it up to question and answer and discussion. The audience are encouraged to ask questions at any point using Zoom Q&A interface. Paul and I will then take turns reading out questions to the audience and the panelists. And lastly, I want to mention that this session is being recorded, and we'll share the video after the event on our website, which is to be emailed. And without further ado, our first speaker is Nicholas Ahrens, who is the Vice President of Innovation from Retail Industry Leaders Association. If you could please introduce yourself and what you do briefly before your statements, it would be great. Same goes for all the panelists. Nicholas, please take it away.
Thanks so much, DK, and thanks so much to CMU for putting this on. I really appreciate being a part of this august group. So my name is Nick Ahrens, and I lead innovation at RELA. We're the trade association representing the largest retailers in each retail vertical. So my perspective today is going to be informed by conversations that we have with executive communities from CEOs and COOs to supply chain, asset protection, and technology verticals. So kind of across the retail organizations. And so, leading retailers are operating in a radically and rapidly changed environment. That is not news to anybody that's on this call. I think maybe what is, people may not fully appreciate and understand is how challenging it was through the initial shutdown and ramp down and then back up again because of the disparate way that was done. It was done on a locality by locality basis, sweeping across the country in different waves. And now we're seeing this second kind of bulge happen through. And that presents enormous challenges for retailers who are figuring out what category they live in, how they are going to be treated, and then how they are going to meet customers and how do they enable, whether it's their supply chains or their stores or their online presence, all to meet customer needs. And then how do all those things work has been enormously challenging. And so they navigated a lot of that, really trying to follow the best science that they could, especially around health and making sure that their customers and their employees were all safe. And so that was that initial wave of trying to follow the health professionals and manage their businesses. We've moved through that first wave, and I think there's a pretty clear understanding and has been wonderful industry sharing amongst competitors to share, what are the best ways of keeping people safe and how do you do that effectively? So that, I think, that threshold level has been met. And then the question, I think, that confronts retailers today are threefold that I would highlight for this conversation. One is around the challenge of forecasting, which is we have truly imperfect information. But the data that they have right now doesn't compare to anything else. It's not like last year. It's not like the Great Recession. Although there are some parallels to and drawing some inspiration from China and the lessons learned there, since they were a little bit of ahead, the lack of historical data and traditional demand signals is making planning and forecasting really difficult. And that's for the near-term need, but also for the capabilities that you need to have to advance. I think precision was a really big focus for retailers in a lot of ways in terms of their supply chain and making sure they understood what was where. I think the ability to have flexibility and responsiveness will be these key indicators now for retailers in the future that maybe was always there, but it will be even more so because the ability to pivot, okay, this place is closed, how are we going to make sure that consumers can get what they need when they need it, is really impactful. And so the use of AI and ML to create that greater flexibility and responsiveness and adaptability, I think is going to be huge moving forward. The second big challenge, I think, is just new consumer behaviors. So what will continue, how long, and what are the time horizons? We've seen, big changes in terms of very large basket sizes. So in retail parlance, that means you buy a lot of stuff on one trip or one instance. So very large basket sizes, high conversion rates. So when people are shopping, they are going to buy. And then, but you've seen a lot fewer trips, a lot less casual shopping, which is, pretty clear because places are closed. And so, and then compare that with what we've seen in the e-com side where you've seen triple digit growth in some sectors. And so I think that has fluctuated by the segment. So video games went through the roof, home went through the roof. Some other areas dropped, hugely and are, 40% off their normal levels. And so you have these big changes in consumer behavior. And the question is, what is the new normal? What is durable, and how long will it last? And how do you forecast and get ready for that and be positioned to meet your customer? And then the last area that I would highlight in this brief opening is just making choices about those investments for the future. You saw retailers radically turn the dial on things like buy online, pick up in store, and curbside, and they went from not having anything to it in every store in a matter of 3 weeks or a couple weeks. That is massive speed for retail. And the question, I think, is how do you make some of those deployments that were done rapidly durable? And then the other question is, what are the other things you need to do and make investments against in order to be positioned properly for that future? And so whether that is around supply chain and making yourself more flexible, whether that's enhanced visibility, there's all kinds of things that need to be done. And I think there are a lot of questions about, okay, what are those pieces that you can do? Some of them are going to be around health and the experience of a customer. So how do you make sure you're making things a lot more contactless? That's the buzzword of retail right now, contactless. And so those are the things that I think retailers are really considering. And so, fortunately or unfortunately, but fortunately for retailers, I think they have now a lot of experience in operating. The question is, how do they continue to progress, and what are the next steps that they're going to take, given that this is kind of a real big crunch time for them getting in front of the holiday season? And what does holiday season look like for many of them is really an open question. So that's kind of the state from where I sit, and look forward to the conversation and look forward to the other panelists here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nicholas. Next, we have Professor John Zimmerman, Tang Family Professor of Artificial Intelligence and Human-Computer Interaction from School of Computer Science.
Hi, I'm John Zimmerman. Happy to talk to you today about some thoughts for retail and COVID. I have sort of three main areas of research that I think intersect with these questions. I do a bunch of work on human-AI interaction. I do work in service design, particularly on digital service innovation. And I do a lot of work on the application of product attachment theory, which is theories of why people develop attachments to certain products or services that they use, and how do we sort of enable digital things to work better in that space. I have four quick thoughts that I want to share in this kind of very stressful time. The first is that now is a really awesome time to think about upgrading your IT system. If things have slowed down, which they likely have, it's actually a lower risk time to make those changes and really try to move into a space where you have real-time inventory management. And this will lay a solid foundation for digital innovation you want to do now, but also for future innovation. Second, if I can get my notes to advance, I want to promote the idea of iteratively prototyping new service innovations and really taking the time to work out the details at a small scale before doing a large deployment, and reflect on Starbucks' movement to mobile sale, which was a disaster, because the stores were completely unprepared. You had a bunch of cups that weren't attached to customers in the store, and it was a mess because they didn't take that time. So while eventually this turned into a great service that has mostly been worked out, the opportunity now, while the customer load is smaller within your environment, to really work that out and think about effective reallocation of space, and to give space for the new service offerings. Third, I want to encourage retailers to rethink their spaces. So we live in a world where factories have been repurposed as malls and office spaces. And now is the time to rethink, maybe we need to repurpose what our retail spaces are. Do we need that much? Can you temporarily at least turn a retail space into a fulfillment center? Could it be a co-working space? Is there some way you can monetize it for value if you're not getting enough value out of running it as a retail space? And whether that's short-term or long-term, you can begin to explore a reuse of the resources that you have. And it's moving past the sort of fixated labels we have. So we call something a store and then we think it's a store. It's somewhat like calling a smartphone a phone, which limits our idea of what it is. No one actually makes phone calls on it. We don't call our ovens clocks because they have clocks on them. So really, can you become more fluid in thinking of your assets and the value that they can produce? And the fourth idea is to really think about personalization in a radically new way. Our retail experience right now is people in mass standing 6 feet apart, waiting 45 minutes to get into a Trader Joe's to buy groceries. People are forced to be lonely, to wait. It's really a terrible service experience, but that actually creates an opportunity. And we know from service theory that when a customer gets a highly personalized performance from a frontline worker, they develop a strong relational attachment to the brand. So can you empower your employees to go above and beyond, particularly when the number of customers in your retail environment is lower? Can they do more? And this becomes an opportunity to develop a much deeper and longer lasting. And thinking about digital personalization, instead of sending recommendations to customers, send them to your frontline employees so they can really personalize and deliver value to each customer. All right, thanks.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Chris Stevens from American Eagle, who's the Vice President of Data Technology.
Hi there, hey everybody. So I don't know if Nick and John were reading my diary, but those are certainly, as a retailer and a retail technology executive, those are certainly things that we're concerned about. You know, they were things that we were thinking about before this hit. And I think to Nick's point, it just sort of exacerbates the need with, combine that sort of with John's perspective on, we also need to rethink how we do these things. We have a pretty robust personalization program, for example, in place at American Eagle, but it's built on, you know, to some extent, to John's point, delivering product recommendations and so forth to customers. But how do we turn that into a different experience based on the model that we have to operate in now and potentially for the next 6 to 9 or 12 months, whatever that might look like? You know, these are definitely things that we're extremely concerned about. You know, the way that, and I sort of lead the AI efforts here, so the way that we think about AI, the way I talk about it is, what really, to simplify it down to applying advanced machine learning to our data to make automated decisions, right? And retailers are notorious for great instinct, great retail and industry instinct, and understanding how to make decisions based on how everything's happened in the past, and whether we're doing that based on human intuition or now on some of the models that we've built in the past. I think Nick called it out. All of that is essentially out the window. So, you know, as a, like I said, a data and technology executive in retail, I am highly concerned because you could sort of go either direction, and both of them are fraught with peril, meaning, look, you could conclude all the work that we've done with data and analytics and modeling based on, you know, primarily, you know, some time series techniques and so on and so forth. That stuff probably goes out the window because the present doesn't look like the past, and the future is probably not going to look like either one of those things. So maybe we should just go back to our instincts. Well, the thing is that our instincts are based on an instinctual understanding of the same history, right? Whether we've quantified it in our heads or at least have developed a deep understanding. And we personally have a lot of great retailers who understand how to run a retail company and make decisions, and are excellent operators, and we have a great company for it. But either one of those paths is fraught with this sort of same danger of, you know, I have no idea what to base on what's going to happen next, whether it's mathematically based on machine learning and AI or based on trusting the intuition of the people that we have. Either one is, you know, is risky for us. So it's a great level of concern. So to some extent, as the, I guess, lone industry retail representative on the panel here, I welcome all the input and questions and ideas and folks on the panel and folks out in the audience. You know, we've got great ideas and things that we're trying to focus on at American Eagle, but I think, you know, this is kind of like a, I don't know, it's not directly blue ocean, red ocean, if you understand the philosophy, but to me, it's kind of like blue ocean in the sense that we all just maybe need to band together here, right? It's not about necessarily competing for the same dollar as we always have been, but how do we solve these problems together? Because otherwise we're all in the same boat, facing the same problems, facing the same challenges. I'd love to think about how as an industry we could sort of band together to solve this stuff. You know, some of the things we are focused on, absolutely, given that we don't know how things are going to go, we don't know, it's hard to forecast what we think is going to happen next 2 weeks from now, let alone 2 seasons from now, is definitely bringing automation, optimization, speed, and dynamism into the supply chain. So if we can minimize our inventory ownership position and move our inventory smartly and fastly, then at least we're in a position to react quickly, like I said, to be in as little of an inventory ownership position as possible to minimize the risk. You know, a lot of retailers are sitting in a place now where they hopefully have liquidated through what they had in March, but if they haven't, then they're in a glut of inventory that's in the wrong season, right? And that's a nightmare. So bringing all of this dynamism into how we move and plan goods, I think is primary to what we're focusing on in the AI space, and definitely customer experience. You guys touched on a lot of that stuff. I mean, we, for example, have spun up buy online, pick up in store, spun up curbside, and all these things very quickly, and customers are absolutely responding to those. And yes, we see traffic is down, conversion is way up. We're leveraging the traffic like never before. But yeah, I don't know what that's going to look like over holiday, next spring, who knows, right? These things are certainly keeping us on our toes, and it makes it for an exciting time. I always thought retail was an interesting and exciting place to work. There's so much data, and all of these interesting problems and ML approaches and so on apply in such a great way to the basic fundamentals of retail. So I think it's an awesome opportunity for all of us who work in technology, who work in data and analytics, AI, machine learning, whether we're in industry, whether we're in, you know, industry leadership groups like Nick is, or in academia like the CMU folks, or partners like Carrie at Google. You know, these are awesome problems to solve. And so if we can figure out a way to kind of hang in there together, and groups like this to turn into sort of actual professional output, I mean, I think, you know, these are interesting and amazing problems to tackle. And so try to look at it as a fun and interesting time. So that's what I know. Thank you. So happy to be here. Thanks, Paul, for including me in this.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Professor Sridhar Tyre, Ford Distinguished Research Chair and University Professor of Operations Management.
Thanks, DK. Welcome, everyone. I think it was one of Obama's aides who said, never let a crisis, go to waste. So we have been handed a crisis. So let's see what we can do about this. As an operations management professor, I teach and I do research on 3 main topics that I think might have some bearing here. I work closely with distribution and logistics, as well as obviously with omnichannel retail. So I actually see both sides. I have students who go to Amazon, and then I have students who go, to Nordstrom and other places, or create startups to help with Nordstrom. And so, in some sense, I'm creating people who do well for Amazon, as well as folks who work in the competition. So in some sense, you can say Carnegie Mellon is providing weapons to both sides of the competition. So I think the omnichannel part really requires, I think, some rethinking, rather than it be mostly physical store and be able to do some amount of online fulfillment. I think, as John mentioned before, one has to repurpose the space, rethink the processes, and rethink the mix really of what is physical and what is online, whether that online fulfillment is shipping from store, or is it buy online and pick up. So I think there's a shift in terms of the mix of things. And so I don't think it needs to be a completely new invention. I've always thought benefiting from lateral thinking, looking at other industries that have had reason to be different in their mix, might be a good way to think about where retailers, may think about it first approximation. The second thing we talk about a lot in supply chain is, are you efficient or are you responsive? Efficiency means that you're somehow cheap. It's very, very deterministic. You're squeezing the cost out. That means the forecasts are very good, and and people used to use toilet paper as the prototypical example of the boring supply chain. If anything else, I think COVID has demonstrated that even toilet paper can get really interesting in these times. Of course, the opposite of that, which we teach, is forecasting is a waste of time. It's all about immediate sensing, and it's about building in responsiveness, and it's about being agile and quick, really the spoils go to the cheetah and not to the slowpoke, right? And so once again, I think we're asking whether the mix between efficient, boring, deterministic, commoditized needs to shift a little bit towards maybe you want to pay attention to what is going on right now and not what happened before. So again, I think of it really as a shift with respect to where people may be thinking. Again, I don't think of either of these two as necessarily inventing something tremendously new. It's just shifting kind of where we are on the frontier. I think there is a great opportunity, if anything, in shaping consumer behavior rather than reacting to it. I bring it up because I think digital transformation has been on the roll for a while. Guys like me do analytics, we develop technologies, but I was also the CEO of a software company selling software, and change management and getting people to buy in to something different and new. It actually is a much more difficult challenge of sociology and psychology than of mathematics and computer science. So I think here's an opportunity, even folks who used to go to bank branches to deposit their checks and really, taking a photo and depositing it has been around for some time, and had only 20%, kind of a take rate, went up to 60%, I think, in the last 45 days. The point is, people are now ready for things that they may not be ready for. And so perhaps there is an opportunity for innovators to say, I see myself very, very, consumers who are now ready to potentially change, people who might have resisted a lot of good ideas or different ideas in the past. So I think there is an opportunity to shape the consumer demand, to go ahead of the curve, take this opportunity. Obviously, I don't have a very good idea. I have a bad idea, and I'm going to close with that. Rather than just having self-driving cars, I'm going to suggest that they also do self-cleaning cars, okay? So that's kind of my innovation for the future. But I think there are things that people can do that are not very different, learning from others who had to do it in the past. And I think there's a great opportunity to shape the consumer kind of demand in the future. So let me kind of stop there.
Thank you, Sridhar. Next and lastly, we have Carrie Tharp, Vice President of Retail and Consumer from Google Cloud.
Hi guys, excited to be here today. Thanks to Paul and DK for having me join. So I lead up retail and consumer at Google Cloud, and I actually come from an operator's background. So I spent my career as a chief digital officer, marketing officer, head of innovation in retail, consumer products, and travel. And bringing the power of what we can do at Google together to help at a time like this has been very exciting. So I'll just touch on a few key themes we hear across our retail customers, and how people are thinking about it going forward regardless of retail subsegments. So there's some retailers that are having kind of their Cyber Monday repeatedly through this pandemic, and then others who are in a much more suppressed demand standpoint. But common themes cut across these retailers. So first is digital experiences. I think each of the speakers spoke a little bit about this on digital to store. So everybody, whether they had pickup in store or curbside or various services, stood something up within the last couple of months. And really what we've seen is operationally that put a big strain on retail. So they might have been able to do it as a low percentage of sales historically, but the demand surge was really unlike whether you were a grocer or a luxury apparel player could have really anticipated. And so we've seen people looking to bring in AI to that experience to say, operationally, how can we use AI to do chatbots in the store, to help people pick, pack, and ship from the store, and do things that are just at a volume that's not the way the store associate was operating in the past. Our research shows over 50% of consumers tried a new service during the pandemic, so maybe curbside. And that just becomes really important because I think some of our speakers have mentioned that trial barrier where people maybe didn't really engage in a service before has certainly come down. So how does retail think about both the brand experience and the operational performance going forward? Second bucket, you've all heard us touch a little bit on supply chain, whether you're going to be responsive or efficient. Much of retail from a margin perspective has been focused on efficiency for quite some time. And so we're spending a lot of time on forecasting. You've heard that theme. But the challenge is, even if you get to, a real-time demand forecast, bringing in new signals. So that's one of the conversations we have a lot from a Google perspective of, can we bring in maps data, search data, all these things to have a better understanding? The supply chain behind it still can't respond fast enough. And so where we've kind of pivoted to is, as a retail executive, I'm used to focusing on what I can control. Every quarter, there were things that I couldn't fix. But things like marketing, promotion, personalization is where you can take those signals and do something this week, this quarter, when you have new information that perhaps you can't get replenishment on a certain item. So for example, sweatpants and sneakers have completely broken with seasonal trends. And maybe you can't get more sweatpants fast enough, but you can be thinking about how you engage with customers in that category differently. And then last is next level digital experiences. So here, no one's quite sure, if we'll be going back into shelter in place. The state I'm in, maybe within a matter of weeks, may shelter again. And so how do you break the old mold of digital, which is reliant on site nav and search? Kind of back, 20 plus years ago when all these web pages started launching, and think about using AI and the combination of virtual reality to do virtual try-on, to pivot to a new experience that engages a customer like the way they're used to engaging in stores. So I think maybe it was Nick mentioning basket sizes being up and trips being reduced. But also when you think digital, you don't have that impulse buy experience online. You're not kind of just walking down the aisles and realizing you needed something you hadn't thought about. So how do we as retailers think of these more immersive experiences, knowing that the customer ability to go to store or interest in going to the store may have fundamentally changed going forward. So that's something everybody's kind of had on the roadmap and been dabbling in, but the priority of that has been pulled forward. And so I think kind of just in wrap up, the other thing I'll say from an AI and data perspective of infusing it to help operate the retail business more effectively, in a crisis, people can get into a pattern of kind of analysis paralysis and like, I have to understand this new consumer, this new behavior, and maybe not take action. And so I think really where we see the power is bringing that supply chain, customer and product data together, and then actually using AI to activate on it in real time, whether that's a personalized offer, whether it's changing the way you're operating in the store, and just doing that in real time versus kind of the historical reporting and thinking about it, and understanding that all data isn't a signal. It's kind of a new time to reassess what data you need to be using, what is a signal, what KPIs you should be measuring. So stressful, but exciting time for retail and lots for us to work on.
Thank you so much. Thank you thank you all the panelists. So for all the attendees, now we're going to open it up to question and answer and discussion. So if you could use the question and answer Zoom interface to ask your question, we will pick out some of the questions. We already see a couple of questions there, but just to get this started, I have one of my own question. So pandemic was of course unexpected for almost all retailers. And there are many dimensions that characterize challenges from COVID-19, as panelists have all discussed. For example, is it customer-centric or employee-centric, immediate versus long-term, and so on and so forth. However, what interests me as a researcher is the dimension of expected versus unexpected, right? So there are very hard problems, still unsolved, very hard problems, but expected problems like the prediction problem. For example, pre-COVID prediction models are now less useful due to the dataset shift problem, such as covariance shift, concept drift, and so on and so forth. And recent literature have been flourishing in that area. But what are some unexpected hard problems, if there are any, that retailers face, which might lag even the starting place, perhaps calling for new innovation and research stream? So I'm interested in knowing this problem that baffled both industry leaders and perhaps researchers, something that might spark research collaboration among the industry and researchers present here.
So I guess I'm not sure, I suppose this is unexpected, but one thing that we've had to spend a lot of time thinking about, naturally, first and foremost, both short and long term, is the safety of our associates and the safety of our customers. And so, you know, we've done a lot of work and done a great job to, one, ensure that our associates are safe if they happen to be at one of our office locations, or that our associates and customers are safe when they're in the stores. But I think if, you know, I have a friend who thinks that COVID will just essentially become like a seasonal flu, only a million times worse, meaning we better figure out how to deal with this forever, right? So if that's the case, okay, fine, let's figure out how to deal with this forever. That means that as a teen fashion retailer, I better figure out how to continually monitor and ensure health safety in my store. I'm not saying we don't know how to do that, but that's kind of a new problem for us. That certainly prior to March wasn't one that I would have expected to have to worry about, right? So how do you, John, you know, design service experiences for a customer that make them feel safe? What I want to do as a retailer historically is make our store feel plentiful and make it feel, for us, make it feel cool and hip and, you know, the kind of place that the kid wants to be. You know, they want to relate to the kids that they see in the stores and obviously the assortment that we're selling and so on. But now there's this whole other tier to that experience that I need to provide a customer that just gets at like fundamental human safety. That, okay, taking your temperature, having some sanitizer, whatever, that's some basic stuff, but that to me is a fascinating thing for all of us to think about. I mean, it's not just teen fashion retail. I mean, it's every, even retail, consumer packaged goods, every industry where there's this human interaction. We're not healthcare experts, right? And suddenly we need to understand how to think that way. So that to me is definitely one that is taking a lot of energy to think through.
Any other panelists want to comment on that before we go to the next question? Nick, are you?
And I would just amplify one element of it, which is it's also really challenging on the health in terms of keeping folks safe when, especially at the beginning, but even now when the science is so unsettled. And so it's quite unclear what you need to do in order to ensure safety. And so when medical professionals and epidemiologists don't have a consensus yet, then it's not like I have this thing I need to choose and therefore you get safety. It's I have this menu of things, some of which may be right, and how do you start to make decisions based on those things? And I think that is pretty it feels unexpected, or it was unexpected to many industry executives, just how little consensus there was around certain things, and until, you know, for quite a while, until you boiled it down. I think we've boiled some of it down, but I still think that there's, you know, you see WHO officials retracting statements about, you know, kind of what are those really key elements. And that amplifies the problem that Chris is talking about, which is that level of uncertainty in decision-making is also quite challenging.
I want to just throw out an idea sort of more inspired by what Chris said. I know, Chris, you're very focused on teens. That's who your audience is. But I think teens have many different mechanisms. They can go on Instagram and find new things. An audience that's really been cut off is the elderly, who have digital barriers and they're much more at risk going shopping. So to me, thinking about, can you do a pop-up store at a retirement home where it's just one store and you have a strong focus on safety and cleanliness, but you're just trying to do it in a very limited instantiation, and it's time-based. Like, okay, people, you have a week to do your shopping at this store because that's when it's visiting you. And I think that kind of innovation sort of hasn't happened yet, and it's a little surprising.
I just wanted to add to that comment specifically because we're having a lot of conversations with our customers around conversational commerce in that sense. So whether it's grocery shopping, of if you've ever built a grocery basket online, it's the most tedious thing ever. And even if you think of you're going to repeat your weekly order, you lose kind of the engagement of I'm walking down the aisle and I'm going to do my meal planning while I do that. And then apparel. And so where there's kind of those digital barriers to entry of how can you get to a more effectively an associate-based interaction. So whether that's AI-based conversational commerce or using collaboration tools like Zoom to do virtual kind of shopping where they don't even have to show up at the pop-up, I think all becomes more near term than before. I think we've been talking about it for years, but the actual demand and need for it has been accelerated.
Great. We've had a number of questions in the Q&A panel, many of them about AI, not surprisingly, and many of you have mentioned AI. In particular, there's a concern about automated decisions versus AI assistance for human managers to make decisions. This is a question close to my heart as well. How do you parse that? And how do you try to balance the apparent efficiency of automating something, because it's going to be optimized in the true sense, with the issues of managing human beings and not treating them as if they were extensions of the mechanisms and essentially robots, to use that word? Would anyone like to answer that?
I don't want to keep going first, but I guess I don't mind. So, I mean, sometimes I don't know that I have some threshold of criteria by which I would answer your question or decide to categorize one or the other. But, you know, American Eagle, we have 90,000 or so things in our assortment at any given moment and 20 million customers or so. So if I want to create a new service design with John at CMU and make really, you know, meaningful sort of outfitting recommendations like CAIRS think about, you know, do a meal planning when you walk through the store. Same thing happens when you walk through a retail store. You do sort of outfit planning and vision, whatever, right? So I want to make product recommendations. Well, I need to do that 90,000 times 20 million at a time, all the time, every time. I'm not going to put a person in the middle to arbitrate the decision that I'm trying to automate, and then I just measure the effectiveness of those automated decisions that have been made over time. But then we certainly allow, you know, the opportunity for our merchant teams to put in the art piece, you know, into decisions like that. But, you know, there are other places where operationally, you know, the idea of bringing forward sort of AI recommended decisions and letting the person make that ultimate lever pull, if you will. There's certainly places I think for both, right? But sometimes the scale is just way too much. I can't possibly have a person think through every one of these recommendations that I might want to make at that scale.
Do you think it's, well, what's the runway on that problem? How far along do you think we are in doing that elegantly and appropriately?
I think we're closer than we think we are. I mean, you know, we have, I don't know if they're rudimentary or extremely advanced. I'm not sure. I'd like to think they're somewhere in the middle. And we see them, you know, just something basic as product recommendations to be incredibly meaningful for the business. We tend to recommend stuff to people that they end up liking. So I think we're somewhere in the middle.
Other comments on AI and automation? Please, Nick.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there are different use cases that retailers are already experimenting with. So call centers is a really good one, especially now with huge call volumes. There are a number of startups who have, you know, done some really amazing work in this space where the goal of their use of AI and ML is to essentially take the best performing call center worker and train others to respond like they do. And I think the real challenge, especially in call centers, is the turnover. So there's massive turnover. So it takes quite a while to get a call center operator up to speed so that they are really good and just like the best. But by the time they get so good, then they move on to something else. And so that's one of those pain points where everyone has had the experience of talking to a call center and having that be very unsatisfying. And so making every one of your interactions something that can be evaluated and analyzed and replicated in a better way is something where that's one of those pain points that can be addressed now.
Yeah, I think, back-end automation, back-end efficiency, those things I think are much more in our control. I think because they are high volume and potentially have a little bit more patterns to them. And to the extent that we can glean some of those, practices and help them, get automated or spread out, I think as the examples being said, I think those things that are already in play are going to get more play with respect to AI and automation. I think the true challenge goes back to things that we have discussed: consumer engagement in a less physical social setting. What is the creativity there? Rather than we be a passive recipient of a good recommendation now and then. How do we engage through an interactive scheme or something, just like we have been forced in online education to make it much more interactive, to keep students engaged through online tests and so on and so forth. Is there an opportunity to engage the customer, shape the customer, understand the customer, using AI and technologies that previously were either felt not to be that important or really did not have the urgency. So I think to Dokyun's original question going through this is almost rethinking a world where you want consumer engagement without physical possibility. I'm just taking an extreme view. Suppose a person says, "I will never go out of home." I'm not saying that's the case, but how would you engage that person to make impulse purchases? How would you create a community of such physically distant people, not to be socially distant, but actually to be socially close? I liked one of the ideas I think John had said, which is, why not bring the store to the consumer rather than take the consumer to the store? I mean, I'm just kind of bring it up in a maximally inverse way. And so are there things that we are trying to do that we shouldn't do? For example, just to throw something provocative out there, don't try to replicate the in-store experience online. Take this opportunity to actually create an entirely new experience, rather than try to recreate. That is, since, why should I create a boring in-class lecture online? I mean, I should try to create an interesting online lecture. So I think there is an opportunity for us to work closely with retailers and say, these are the technologies available. Here are these crazy professors who are usually impractical. Maybe this is an opportunity for some of those impractical ideas, to feel somewhat practical. So I think of that as maybe an opportunity, for bringing in out of the box thinking with obviously pragmatic, high margin, high volume business. So
this was a beautiful sweep from the original question about automated versus AI enhanced into other applications of AI back into these other broader, more important issues. Carrie, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of add on some of the comments Chris was making at the beginning of, as all of us go into the journey of AI and actually using it to change customer experience and not just via back-end automation, I think it's on all of us to think about the governance and the principles we apply, because something like recommendations, I always said as a retailer, my intention is to get you the best recommendation possible. I want you to buy something and be happy with it. And so there's low risk in some areas that we're dabbling in. There's other areas like pricing and promotion, that there is a potential for damage or perceived harm to a consumer based on how you got to the answer for them versus someone else. And so it's just us understanding, everything from, are your training data sets big enough to ensure you're not reinforcing biases? Is it a process that needs human in the loop? Kind of just understanding and having a fair and balanced assessment aside from kind of the A/B test of, did this get me to a better business result? I think we're kind of at the newer frontier of that, of what does that really look like? Because I don't think anybody enters an exercise. I used to be testing hundreds of use cases at a time, that there was any ill intent, but kind of speeding through those use cases to get to value, you could miss, understanding the impact AI could have on that situation. So even from a Google perspective, we're looking at explainability of AI to help business leaders understand, how did you get to this forecast versus that forecast, or this recommendation versus that recommendation, just so that you can understand and plan and run your business more effectively. But it also helps reinforce, when you do these principal reviews and understanding what's going on under the covers, that you have a better understanding of why AI was coming up with a different answer than potentially a human was. And so I think it's just each organization setting that new agenda for themselves and how they want to kind of move forward in this space in a way that's best for business and for the customer.
I want to just push back a little bit on explainable AI. Not that I don't think it's a good idea, but I think it's how you do it. So the very first TV show recommender I worked on 20 years ago at Philips, the most discriminating feature that determined if you were going to like a TV show was that it was on after 5 p.m. Sharing that with the consumer does not give them confidence that machine learning is helping them. And so I think we have to think, where are we producing an explanation that's actionable, that's helping the customer or the worker achieve their actual goal, and really thinking about, how do we combine human and machine intelligence to do the things that neither of them can somehow do on their own.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
I was just going to call it, I think that's an excellent point. I think part of the power of AI is all the things you can't see. So like the after 5 example is something that a human probably would have seen in the data to begin with, and then just knowing from a human behavior standpoint, it's kind of, where are the nuances that you don't understand what signals are, and it becomes actionable, to your point. That it's, how do you kind of, I always said to my merchants from a planning perspective, how do you take AI and make you a 10x better version of the merchant you were yesterday?
Indeed. A bit of point about the XAI, explainable AI, interpretable machine learning. I think we have, as a user, we have to realize that this is a tool, and as any other tool, it can give you some false information, or there are a lot of work now about adversarial attacks against these explainable AI methods. But in the end, it is a tool, right? So it's up to the human user to see if this is a spurious signal, or it's something interesting to look further down into. And one thing that keeps constantly coming up with the explainable AI is user has to know that this is basically a view into the model, not how the real world works, right? So models the world, which could be faulty. And as long as the user understands that, it should be useful. This is great. I think
another thing that people maybe underestimate the value is combinations of events that are very difficult for humans to have seen in their past and understand kind of the joint impact of that combination, I think get picked up in the data. To going back to Carrie's point, if it's only 5 p.m. or if it's only weekend, or if a famous actor is on the show and so on, yeah, okay, that like a single factor, two factors, what, most of us have probably figured it out. But I think there's an opportunity for AI is to present some combinations that a priori might have slipped you, but exposed, you believe them. So I mean, it's almost like believable AI in the sense that is, after I tell you the answer, do you say okay, or do you say no, man, this is just an artifact of a nonlinear search, and tomorrow when you run it, it's not going to show up. So this is like answer for today with no real belief. So it's almost if we can come up with some combinations that exposed at least seem sensible, that may be something that AI can provide in scale. That's what I mean.
Chris, did you have something to say?
No.
Oh, okay.
I mean, kind of always, but not this
time. Okay. So we had a hand up from, I think that's Venki, Professor of Marketing. So there's also a question I see from question and answer. So this came up in the conversation, so I thought it would be a nice leadway. Is there, so Venki Shankar asks, is there a retailer thinking about blending contactless with human interface through augmented reality and virtual reality? Every shopper can use an app to get virtually into the retailer's physical store and talk to associates, examine the aisle virtually, try products using Magic Number, and order for delivery. And I thought this was pretty cool because I know now there is like a virtual sort of a Second Life kind of game environment where people have virtual conferences.
So I'd like to jump on this first instead of Chris. There's a pattern when you have a new medium of duplicating a previous medium. So when film came out, they started making films of stage plays, and it was horrible. And it took a while for film to become its own thing. So VR and AR are in this emergent space, and they will bring us something cool. We have no idea what it is, but it's not going to be the recreation of an in-store experience. And that's actually a really limiting way of thinking what we should do with it. So I want to get back to Sridhar's point that the online experience needs to be its own unique thing, and it should be awesome at what it can do. Virtual reality can help me go to the factory where it's being made. Like it can provide this entirely different thing. So don't simply recreate what I can do. And I think it's up to retailers to really explore the space and the media experience they're trying to have with their customers.
John, would history tell us that the process is, though, to fumble our way through stage plays as movies, or should we just be experimenting with big, new, crazy ideas? And the answer seems obvious, but perhaps it is fumbling our way through AR in the store, and then that's where the new idea will unlock itself.
So
I don't know the answer to that.
I'll say no. And I want to use the example of the Rio MP3 player. So I was at Philips, so this is in my worldview, which was basically we took a Walkman, which had kind of become a Discman, which had kind of become this MP3 player, but it was still the idea of an album's worth of music. It's this constrained thinking, and Apple came out with the iPod, which is like carry your lifetime collection of music with you. And I think when you started to look at the streaming services, they offered a radical departure. Why do you own music? They didn't fumble forward in the same sort of way. And I think it's going to be the bold thinking that makes a difference, not the recreation thinking.
So there are many questions coming in the Q&A. At the risk of throwing a flashbang into the crowd, there's a lot of concern about Amazon. And I wonder if anyone on the panel would like to answer that or address it to some extent. One is about competition with Amazon. And the corollary is, shouldn't we be doing everything about that? Shouldn't we be focused entirely on carving out a space in the context of Amazon? Carrie, you're nodding. Do you have a thought on that?
Didn't want to jump in before anyone else. I've spent my career doing business directly with Amazon and competing with Amazon. And I tell you, I don't know what everybody's experience was, but I would tell you during the pandemic, I was let down by Amazon Prime, quite a bit. So they didn't have the inventory, couldn't meet shipping. They were actually staging types of products behind essentials because they had to cover everything everywhere because that's the nature of their business. And it created opportunity for a lot of the customers we work with at Google. Local became the new currency, local inventory, kind of local marketing, local engagement, that you actually could get it. If they said they were going to send it, it was actually going to be there. And so there's some consumer sentiment in thinking more local, supporting an actual local business. But aside from supporting an actual local business, it was going to kind of tried and true retailers that, had a presence and were able to deliver the goods, experience, et cetera, whatever it might be. So I think the pandemic has created a fresh opportunity where, you take something for granted in the Amazon experience until the moment it doesn't work and you can't get the toilet paper and you can't get hand sanitizer and you can't get, a shirt either. And so thinking about all these experiences we've been talking about with renewed focus, we've seen a lot of people kind of restacking the roadmap of things they kind of presume potentially Amazon had already won that high ground of really now the consumer expectation shifted. And so how do you now gain market share out of that? So I think it's a very exciting time, not to say anybody's figured out the perfect answer, but speaking with a lot of retailers about how do you take this as a market share moment given the new context.
I mean, almost, very similar to efficiency versus responsiveness is local versus, in the cloud. I mean, cloud is great, but it assumes you have Wi-Fi or something. I mean, so, right. But if your Wi-Fi and your connection's down, it doesn't do you any good that it's kind of stored efficiently over there. And you wish to God that you had something on your laptop. So I think it boils down to, again, as you said, people take a certain amount of routine life as granted because we have made it so deterministic and people forget all the links that are there. And I think this pandemic has given great visibility to a lot of links that people never thought about consciously, and different pieces of the links that nobody ever dreamt of. I mean, to me, President Trump using the word supply chain 3 times in a sentence, which of course it did not complete, but the fact that he said it 3 times was the first time the President of the United States has highlighted supply chain, right? And I think, like you said, people probably never thought about local inventory having such a premium before. Right? It's almost like, look, it's right here. It's like the olden days when people felt comfortable because they had a branch, because in their mind they thought, hey, the money is sitting in the vault. I mean, it's not, but that, and now we've gone into a complete currency where we believe in money. It's all bits and bytes. And I think it's a matter of one bad financial shock when kind of these bits and bytes disappear and people are back into, hey, I need my coins back. So maybe there is again something that people can take advantage of, where local inventory, more guaranteed and secure fulfillment, becomes a business model that Amazon can't really compete with.
I think there's also an opportunity around expertise. You can't get any expertise from Amazon. If you know exactly what you want, you might be able to find it. But if you're making choices like doing home plumbing, or if you need like a stylist to help you put something together, they're not going to provide that because they're all about scale and efficiency. So to me, don't try to copy them, but to lean into the spaces where they're super weak, where there's a huge opportunity for innovation. And I think this sort of gets at that local, but in a different way, because you can digitally connect people. You can now grab experts much more efficiently to deliver them to your individual customers than you could in a physical retail store where you have somebody waiting for a customer to show up.
Other panelists on that comment? No, we're good. What I think the exciting opportunity is to allow customers to bring their values to the interface, if you will. So if I know someone is local versus not, I might prefer that. I have a bakery right around the corner. I'm privileged to live near 5 Points Bakery. And the commitment and the constant feeling that they are part of my neighborhood and my community is very important to me. So if I can support them. But the UI doesn't always allow me to do that. So that's an interesting question in itself. How does personalization and interface allow me to find my values in my interactions? Anyway, DK?
Right. So we have more questions from Ravi, Professor of Operations Research and Computer Science. He asked in the beginning, what new customer behaviors can be enabled from existing analysis / AI of past data? And I think this connects back to something that was said earlier by a panelist. For example, with the pandemic, more than ever, consumers are willing to change the brand or the product that they're trying. And this observation has been this observation has been made during the Great Depression, as well as during hurricane. People just simply for cost reasons they're trying different things, or they're venturing out of their brands just because things are not available. Perhaps that's another sort of opportunity to see a new customer behavior and strategize. Any panelists want to talk about this?
I mean, I think the prototypical lateral thinking is going back to health, right? I mean, telemedicine, in the olden days, you felt you need to talk to a doctor, and the doctor knew you and your family, and they took care of the whole you in some sense, right? That already got fractionalized and broken up into specializations and 20-minute meetings and appointment schedulings and so on and so forth, right? And now with this, people are like, look, I just want somebody to look at my kid, ask a few questions. I'm happy to take a thermometer and answer questions. Telemedicine, if they can tell me, hey, this is what's going on. Don't worry, it's not COVID. Just go pick up an anti-allergic in a medicine, right? And so again, I think there are opportunities here for things from other areas that folks might have resisted in the past. And we know from data that folks are open to these things. So I bring up appointment scheduling because it is one of the difficult operations problems that we try to solve in healthcare. Nobody likes it, right? Because you set up an appointment, the doctors are late, or you are late, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to say this to retailers. If people are afraid to crowd into a store and you don't want them standing outside with masks on, is there some combination of appointment scheduling that can work in retail where you tell folks, look, why don't you come to the Apple store between 2 and 3 p.m. and I won't make you stand outside, right? Can we do something like that, right?
I think it also calls to, combining one of the first things we talked about with, the foundations of modeling are that I'm going to use the past to sort of model out what I think is going to happen next. And then you combine that with the sort of big data era that we live in, where the more data I have and all this history that I have, and all these signals that might be in there are going to help me understand what I think is going to happen next. I think it's going to force us to focus on recency. What are the things that are happening right now? And whether it's in supply chain or customer behaviors, really understanding the richness of what's happening now so that I can use that to help me sort of understand what I think might be happening next. It doesn't mean devoid of the history, but certainly it may, because the history is potentially going to be completely disconnected from the next 6 or 12 months, but focusing on the last few weeks into the next few weeks, and really focusing in more on the algorithm, right, and the approach that you're taking in your AI or your ML techniques, as opposed to just the brute force of big data behind it, right?
Okay.
So
yeah, go ahead.
We've touched on supply chain a couple of times. I'd like to drill down a little bit, and a number of questions in the chat are about that. It's a systemic problem, we know that. And over time, the supply chain does its beautiful self-regulation and it kind of evens out basically, and it works. And then you have a pandemic and all hell breaks loose. How does that inform how to think in the future about supply chain? Does it change what we do Or do we just have to be just in time and fake it every time? What can we know ahead? What
Yeah,
surprised me.
This is a question that has come up, obviously, as you said. I want to push back a little bit on Carrie on Amazon, not because I'm a big Amazon fan, but the man set up Amazon Prime during good times, and now you can't expect him to deliver Amazon Prime. Maybe he could have given us some discount on it during the bad time. But that connects to Paul's question, which is, in chemical industries and in pharma industries, thinking laterally again, they make these chemicals very infrequently because of economies of scale that are needed in chemical processes. And therefore, they keep something called catastrophe stock. And that is why when Hurricane Katrina was hitting New Orleans, they had stock, but it was so close to New Orleans, they had to put it on tankers and move it to New Jersey. So chemical companies, and both for safety as well as obviously to protect the inventory. And we thought the government had PPE and ventilators and other things in catastrophic stock. Interestingly, this is something you can't blame Trump. It wasn't replenished by Obama administration, actually. So to answer your question, I think we have thought about catastrophic stock in certain very important industries. And maybe what you're asking is, should we be thinking about some like catastrophic stock or some kind of super responsive emergency reorganization of supply chain, even on consumer product goods? Or should we just be, I don't know, regular people and say, okay, so you didn't get your favorite book in time during the COVID crisis.
So I think it's a little unfair to conflate favorite book with medicine or toilet paper for that matter. Where I was going though was there was an experiment in the 70s, actually I shouldn't call it an experiment, it was actually in Chile, where the attempt was to understand from an informational point of view what the entire GDP was doing. Who's making what in what time period. Of course, it was way ahead of its time. Is anyone in the world today, in our world, in this retail and service design world, thinking about simulating the supply chain with data as a means of understanding the impact of potential pandemics or issues or floods or tornadoes or whatever, and therefore to add resiliency? How do we become more resilient?
Yeah, MIT has a very nice lab and software that they use to recover from hurricanes. I don't know if it is also pandemically oriented, but when we got the hurricanes in Puerto Rico and FEMA wanted some quick simulations, this is what they did. They would know if this part of the island shut down, how would the demand shift to this side? And they also would understand what if we didn't have electricity and what if we didn't have roads. So a very nice area of work that could be brought to bear here is really post-hurricane and post-earthquake, that kind of management and simulation work that's been done. Of course, they always thought of it as localized in space and not global supply chain, where the whole supply chain of the world goes down at once. So even MIT would have to do a little bit of the upgrade over there. The only benefit may be that not everything happens at the same time. There is some benefit of time that something happened in China, then it happened in Europe, then it came to the US. And so there could be some benefit that although it took place globally, it didn't take place exactly at the same time. So I believe some of those directions may be worthwhile to look at.
So academically, I get it, but is the retail world itself thinking in these terms, Karen?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it comes back to one of Sridhar's original points of resiliency versus efficiency. So much of retail, even if you had a perfect answer about what it should look like, kind of the Amazon example, you wouldn't actually stock to it anyway. Because when you understand the fundamental retail P&L, it's not something you're going to be able to solve for. You're really kind of just managing around the margins, if you will. And so the Amazon point is not to say that it is a reasonable expectation. They should have been able to handle everything in the pandemic. But as an operator from retail, and Chris has probably had this experience as well, doesn't mean that consumer expectations were not higher than what was delivered across a lot of retail so far. And so it is these brand moments. And I think John mentioned some of these experiences earlier of like, where are you creating connections with customers and helping reset their expectations and figuring out what really does matter. So for many retailers, as an example, even if they had, pre-stocked toilet paper, they would not have wanted to because it's a low margin product. So a lot of mass merchants right now are having great sales, low margin, because all of the sales switch to categories that they don't make their margin on. And so they wouldn't have gone back and suddenly, bought 3x the toilet paper before the pandemic just to meet customer expectations. That wouldn't be a solve that would lead to more retail bankruptcies, if you will. But it's, when you kind of understand your brand positioning, what your brand promise is, what are the things that you are going to put on the end of the continuum that you want to be a little bit more resilient versus efficient, and understanding what that right kind of strategy matrix is based on the business you're in. So for an apparel retailer, that looks very different than grocery, looks very different even from a mass merchant, I think is the big question. We've worked with a lot of retailers to do a combination of demand forecasting and behavioral modeling to get that recency element in that Chris was mentioning. Not that it allows them to solve a buy that they didn't make a couple of months ago, but it helps them understand state to state, as an example, how a consumer is reacting to case counts and shelter in place, because in Texas, it's very different than California, it's very different than Illinois. And so what can they do from a services standpoint, staffing, how they're thinking about employee safety and appointments, all these different things are just ripple effect through the different steps of the retail value chain, and using that more real-time information to operate differently, even if the product's still not going to be there.
Can I just make a point on just a practical reality about why maybe we haven't seen some of these things happen in the supply chain or just broadly across retail? Part of it just kind of in terms of level setting, many retailers have huge amounts of their systems that are legacy systems. And they haven't, so we can talk about all the advanced capabilities that you want, but many of them have core capabilities that aren't in the cloud, are not even accessible. They are in mainframes. They are in systems that are not able to translate into kind of modern capability. And so, and sure, on their long-term roadmap, they had moving off of those things, but getting the dollars to do that when your e-com number, percentage of mix was what it was, is very different than maybe today when you're sitting looking at a 40-60 mix or a 30-70 mix. And so the financials look different. So I think just one practical element of this entire conversation is there's a huge swath of retailers, majority of them maybe, who at least have some core components that are in legacy systems that aren't able to accelerate them maybe the way that they want to. And so solving that problem is almost a predicate. And in many ways, it's already been solved, but solving it at a dollar point that makes sense is a predicate to many of the things that we've been talking about today.
Just to add to what Nicholas said, whenever I collaborate with like a large retailer, the single biggest problem is due to the disconnected data, right? So they outsource one thing to another company, they do in-house one thing, and then it's not connected, so you can't run any algorithms on it. And having been an engineer, software engineer before academia, there is like a incentive disconnect, right? The higher ups don't really care as long as things work, right? And then so the engineers are not incentivized to convince the higher ups, because porting legacy system is quite frankly super boring, right? So, and if it breaks, then you're gonna get fired or it's gonna be problematic. So there's like a disconnect that I've seen from the both sides. Maybe perhaps this is like a sort of an opportunity for everyone to, get connected, put things on cloud or connect systems so that you can solve problems. And I think, did anyone have anything else to say on this issue? If not, I'll move on to the next question. So I think this thing, we didn't talk much about this, but Samuel Levy asked, how can retail businesses communicate more effectively to their customer base through the variety of existing channels and differentiate themselves from the competition during the current crisis? I think this goes to a lot of things that are currently happening with the injustice and whatnot. If a retailer does something takes a certain stand, they're under fire for taking that stand. If they don't take a certain stance, they're under fire for doing that. And I was wondering if there was any sort of insights from working with a lot of different retailers, what people have done or what companies have done that might work or might not work.
Well, I'm just going to throw it out there and I'm ask Chris and Gary maybe to see. I mean, this is a real challenge, right? I mean, the issue is the following. At the very basic level, economists say, hey, why don't you just change the price and you can modulate the demand and it kind of works out. But the minute you say you want to change the price, you are getting into dark territory here because you're automatically saying, well, that means rich people have access to it or not. This then boils down to questioning whether capitalism as a mode of society. So I think what this is going to bring us up, if it has brought us up, is really the game that we all have been playing during, let's say, mostly good times. Has some features, okay, and we know how to play in those features, and some of those features are being questioned at the very core, with respect to access, with respect to pricing, and things of that type. And so I think you bring up actually a very tough question that that people have to do, and it also boils down to what Carrie brought up earlier. You want to be fair, but you want to be solvent. It doesn't help you that you went bankrupt being good. I mean, so, what is the minimum non-bankruptcy strategy that is maximally fair that you can do? It's kind of the best case a CEO can go for, because at some point they will no longer exist, right? And I think I have to say, whether you're a university president today or whether you're a senior executive in industry today, beyond the operational and technology challenges, I think this deep questioning of the capitalist game is perhaps what is keeping many real world people not sleep well at night. But I will let Chris and Carrie, who work in the real world more than I do, see what they're up to.
Yeah, I'm not sure about existential questions about capitalism, but I think all that you can do as a company or a brand is just kind of come back to what your values are. And our values are empowerment and kindness, and so I think we just try to sort of come back to those values. Personally, I'll let everyone else opine on the efficacy of capitalism going forward, right? That's the world we operate in. I'm a capitalist myself, but I think as a brand, you're right, it's hard, for sure. But the things that we have to do are just, again, go back to our values, be true to our values, listen to each other, which means listen to our customers, listen to our associates, listen to each other in a forum like this, and just listen and understand, right? And be committed to where we can do better, doing better.
Yep, and I think I would just add to that it's kind of the, coming from an authentic place from your brand. So back to your brand values, committing to change where change needs to happen potentially in your own organization, and always listening to the voice of the customer. I think when you think of different communication methods, your associates and your call centers are kind of your front line to customers and making sure that they have everything they need to listen, be successful, and provide service. It's not necessarily a time, I think, for kind of mass marketing where, you saw a lot of brands at the beginning of the pandemic kind of come out and try to make, kind of aspirational statements, which there was a decent amount of backlash. And really, even from a Google and a marketing perspective, where we've seen people have success, is something much more focused, tied back to their brand values, but being very timely and relevant to the situation, whether it's pandemic or some of the social unrest that's been going on.
All right, thank you everyone. So I think we're nearing time for the end. So perhaps if a panelist, if you have any closing remark, maybe take 1 or 2 minutes to close, and then we can have Chris Kissel give us what's next.
I guess I can jump in really quickly. I think you heard a lot of different perspectives. I think the main thing to always remember is right now is one of those periods where there isn't a right answer. There's not a right model. Kind of the playbook that existed and that, as Chris mentioned, is kind of based on instinct and experience in the industry. A lot of that has changed, and it's time, as John mentioned in several of his comments, to create the next version of what it looks like rather than a copy of the old or just an iteration of the old. It's more step function and fundamental change. And so that's everything from using data to fundamentally reshaping experiences. So I think we've talked a lot about tools that are out there, and none of them, I would tell you, are all the way down the maturity curve of exactly how you use them and how it provides value in the business. But it's the perfect experimentation time of the combination of a lot of these tools to get to what that next version in retail is. So very exciting time, and was glad I got to join and hear from the panelists as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie, for being a part of this. Thanks publicly for your partnership. To me, it's just such an interesting time. Whether you're a data and analytics professional, either in industry or in academia or wherever it might be, or, quite frankly, it's just an interesting time to be a human being. And so, trying to sort of approach every day with just openness and curiosity, and, as you apply that to the problems that we're talking about and the industry that we're talking about, it's a little trite, I suppose, but these are amazing opportunities, right? Back to John's point about the early days of movies, or Henry Ford and his comment about faster horses, right? Like, if there's anyone out there in the audience that is kind of getting into their career, it probably seems like an incredibly scary time to have to get started. But this is an opportunity to, invent the Model T or the iPod or whatever, right? These things are problems that all of us, with all this combined experience and academic backgrounds and everything else you can hear, we don't have the answer for either. And so I just think it's an awesome, incredible, vastly interesting, amazing time. Just to be alive, quite honestly, and to be thinking about these problems. It sounds so esoteric, but I actually believe that. Yeah, it's scary and uncertain, and I have faith in humanity. We're going to figure this out and figure out how to get along together and get along in a good way. But just these are fascinating, completely unknown new problems to solve. What an interesting time to be alive.
I would just throw out, this was awesome. Thank you, Paul and DK. I rarely get to talk to people that aren't professors or grad students. And this was super exciting, and to hear what you guys had to say was so refreshing.
Thank you. Sridhar,
And I guess I would just say thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I think it is an exciting time in retail because the problems are meaningful. And when you're solving, how can someone get food? How can someone, get what they need so that their kids have clothes? How can, you're solving problems that have real world efficacy. And that's the really cool part about retail. And you're doing it at scale, where you're having data problems, where AI matters, where you can truly do something that is meaningful. I think, it is a great time to come into retail, but also just being in retail, the ability for very large companies who in many cases have been risk averse for a long time to actually do something and change the way that they're operating. We're seeing it real time with executives like Chris, but also just across it. And I think, folks would be maybe surprised at how willing companies are to change their behaviors and to meet the moment, to meet where their customers need them to be. And so I would just say, thanks for engaging this conversation. I look forward to continuing it. I think we can hopefully get something really good done out of this.
Thank you, Sridhar.
Yeah, I think I'm very happy that you guys organized something like this. I think when you first thought about it, COVID wasn't there, so you were probably thinking about a fun AI plus retail, world, not the gravitas that has come into play. But I want to echo what Nicholas said. Gravitas is good, right? I mean, it forces you to look at things just a little bit more seriously, and an opportunity to contribute perhaps in important ways. To me, this time has been good in the sense that it has made a lot of people rethink about the globe and the world much more broadly than what preoccupies us on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully that will lead to some good solutions.
Thank you. Paul, do you want to say something at the end?
Just my thanks to everyone. It's been wonderful. We look forward to continuing, and we should turn it over to Chris now, I think, to tell us a little bit about what we're planning and to invite you back next time.
Yeah. So before, I thank you everyone for coming, panelists, industry leaders, and the faculties and participants. I know some people are in a different time zone across the world, so this is amazing. Thank you all for coming. And now, I would like to introduce Chris Kissel, Associate Director of Corporate Partnership here at CMU. We'll wrap up the event and discuss what is next for CAIRS initiative. Chris has been instrumental. He's been doing the heavy lifting to organize this, bring this to all of you. Chris?
Thank you so much, DK. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been something that we've been planning for quite a long time, and certainly we weren't expecting COVID when we were doing so. But we were really thrilled to have you as part of, have everyone in the attendees as part of the virtual roundtable today. And we hope you found the conversation to be interesting and relevant to the challenges that your company is facing. And as you've heard earlier at the very beginning of the call, for follow-up, you will receive a link to the video of today's discussion, and you'll also receive a written summary along with links to related faculty panelist papers that you can take a look at later to dive deeper into the conversation. And you can also expect to hear more about CAIRS and future events in the coming months, each focusing on a new set of topics. And this is, I think, a helpful maybe reminder if you've seen in some of the publications we've sent out earlier, but CAIRS is really dedicated to bringing the talent and the creativity of faculty and students to bear on the challenges of the retail and service industries. We seek to build a network of industry partners committed to engaging with us and setting up projects focused on addressing those challenges. More details will come to you in the following weeks about how you can get involved. But until then, don't hesitate to reach out with your questions and thoughts and comments. Finally, I'd like to thank today's panelists, and certainly for them sharing their time and expertise with all of us. I'd like to thank specifically Nick Ahrens and the Retail Industry Leaders Association for spreading the word about this event to their membership. And I'd like to acknowledge the time and effort that Paul and DK have both given in shaping and moderating today's call and the overall vision for CAIRS. And last but not least, a thank you to Laura Elford and all of our university partners who assisted with such matters as the event website, communication, audio, video, and certainly thank you for your participation in the audience. We couldn't have done it without you. So thank you again so much, and hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.